Rely on you to be our eyes on the ground, respectively. Now, I want to bring in David Sanger, a CNN political and national security analyst. He's also the White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times. Also here, David Hale, former U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, Pakistan, and Jordan. Also, Major John Spencer, the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute and the co-author of Understanding Urban Warfare. Ambassador Hale, let me begin with you this evening. How do you think Iran is viewing this move by Israel tonight?
Well, Iran has suffered a series of blows, obviously, because of the successes of Israeli operations against their most precious proxy, Hezbollah, after a long period in which the Iranians felt they had the upper hand. But we can't discount anything, but the pattern of the past has been such that the Iranians would be loath to get themselves directly involved in a confrontation with Iran. We saw that with Israel, excuse me. We saw that earlier this year when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders were killed in Damascus. Iran lobbed a bunch of missiles and drones toward Israel, and Israel and the United States and other neighboring states were successful in interdicting those attacks. So I think the Iranians prefer to go back to where they're comfortable, which is asymmetrical warfare, in which Arab proxies are paying the price for the campaign against Israel.
David Sanger, Netanyahu launched the operation just hours after President Biden said this.
Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plan?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
David, why does there seem to be so much daylight between the United States and Israel right now?
Well, it is remarkable, and there are a couple of possible explanations. One of them is that these two leaders don't have a whole lot left to say to each other. Since this all began with more than 10 days ago, with the pager attacks, the attack on the missile facility or manufacturing facility in Syria, and then the killing of Nasrallah, there have been no conversations yet between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. The White House has said that they're looking for an opportunity to do that. Well, it wouldn't be very hard to do one. Second is, I suspect that the Prime Minister has determined that, first of all, the United States is certainly not going to protest the killing of a mass murderer like Nasrallah. I mean, after all, Hezbollah and Nasrallah were on the U.S. terror list, so they were well within the bounds of the relationship for that. But I think that the Prime Minister has calculated rightly that he could ignore the call for a ceasefire that you just heard from President Biden, and that the administration told us last Wednesday night they thought the Israelis had agreed to. Well, that was just before they began all of this invasion. So it's a pretty remarkable example of defiance of an ally. And in part, it's because President Biden has declined to use his only leverage, which would be to withhold some weaponry. And he doesn't want to do that and appear to be keeping Israel from defending itself.
Major Spencer, let me bring you into this conversation as well, because Israel says they are going after a number of villages, that's their quote, on the border. What would an operation like that actually look like?
Yeah, it would be very contested. I mean, similar, but if not worse than 2006 Lebanon war. Hezbollah has had many, many years to prepare. It's called the Land of Tunnels. The Hezbollah tunnels in southern Lebanon are hundreds of miles. The anti-tank guided munitions have advanced since 2006. It would be a very strong fight, and we've seen, to include what the IDF have released of Hezbollah also trying to embed in civilian areas like those urban areas, which are bigger now. I mean, all the roads lead to urban areas, but I mean, I don't want somebody thinking this will look like the urban warfare of Gaza. I mean, the objectives are different. The terrain is different. Even the strategic goals that this is about putting Hezbollah out of a direct gun pointed at Israelis' heads. I was up there in February. You can literally see positions where they're not supposed to be in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution, but you can see positions from Israel's actual border. So it would be a lot different, but yes, there would be very destructive warfare, trying to get Hezbollah to adhere to, over a year's worth of diplomatic means to get them to clear back.
Major Spencer, we're aware too that there's an unspecified number of U.S. troops that are being put on prepare to deploy orders. And I want to bring in at this point too, David Sanger on this point. Is there a risk here? We and I have talked about this in the past. When you've got an unspecified number of troops that are getting these orders, and these orders are prepared to deploy orders, Americans' ears perk up. The question being, of course, will the U.S. end up getting involved specifically in this?
Well, if the history is any indication, the U.S. would probably do everything it could to stay out. But there is one condition under which I imagine the U.S. could be brought into it, Laura, and that would be if the Israelis go directly after Iran or against Iran's nuclear program, and the Iranians respond against Israel. We did see in the spring, the U.S. participated very heavily in intercepting a direct missile attack, the first one in decades, against Israel from Iran. Actually, it was the first since the Iranian Revolution. And I could imagine seeing that situation again. And of course, that's exactly what the president's trying to avoid in the last 4 months of his presidency, and at a time that Donald Trump is, making a somewhat disingenuous case that the world was at peace when he was president.
Ambassador Hale, I'm eager to hear your response on this because we keep hearing this phrase tonight, the IDF saying it's a limited operation. They're not giving a timeline. Do you have an expectation of what that timeline would look like and what the parameters of a so-called limited operation would look like?
Well, the Israelis learned in the 2006 war, which is the last time we can sort of judge how things go, although the level of sophistication and amount of military equipment is vastly larger. But they found that although their chief of staff at the IDF convinced the prime minister that they could achieve their goals through an air assault only, it turned out they couldn't. And so they were forced at the very end of the 2006 war to launch a ground invasion that didn't go very well. I think they've learned some of those lessons, and I think they realize if they're going to achieve their goal of creating a security environment on the border that enables 60,000 civilians to go back home, they do have to go in and mop things up. But the key question, as your correspondent in the field said, was how do you define and how do they define limited and short term? Because that's a very subjective set of things. And if it's really quick and really short, that's fine. But there's a temptation to have the mission creep. And there's nothing, by the way, that would be more welcome by Iran and Hezbollah than have the Israelis bogged down again in a long-term occupation in Lebanon. That was guaranteed to turn the tables back again in favor of Hezbollah over time in the Lebanese environment. So I hope the Israelis have learned that lesson. We'll do what they're announcing, which is that this will be quick and limited.
Well, gentlemen, we'll be waiting to see what happens next. This is a very urgent situation. Stand by. Thank you, everyone.